Hello, I'm Sarish. I'm a registered psychotherapist and an IFS consultant, and I wanted to talk about how to work with polarizations using IFS. So, polarizations often come into play when you're using IFS and trying to work on a target part, and you see that there's other parts that won't let it happen, and so there's this tug of war going on inside. What is a polarization? So it's a power struggle between parts where parts are pushing for their agenda or survival strategies. So one part wants to do it this way, another part wants to do it another way, and the internal dynamic becomes rigid and stuck. I also want to say that there's often a parallel between the client's inner system and the way parts are reacting and relating to each other and the external environment that the client has lived in. So, especially their childhood and the way people in the client's environment have related to each other, especially the client. So, to identify the polarization, it might just become obvious. The client might just say, I have a part that wants to do this, a part that wants to do that. And then you know that there's this polarization inside. But other ways are if, you'll see that there's manager parts in the client that are bringing the client to therapy for firefighter behaviors. An example would be a critical manager is bringing client to therapy and the client saying, I hate myself for all the drinking that I'm doing. And so we know that kind of self-criticism will trigger the exile's shame, which will then fuel the firefighter behavior even more. So there's that polarization between the manager and the firefighter, or if there is stuckness where the client sets a goal or decides to take a course of action and leaves the session, comes back and says, I didn't get around to doing it. So you know that there's parts in the client that don't want to take that action, and then there's the part in client that is bringing the client to therapy and saying, I want to do this. Or ambivalence, where clients may say, I want to stay in this relationship, but I also don't want to stay with this person. So, like, there's that ambivalence. And another way where you can check to see if there's a polarization is anytime the client's getting close to the target part or an exile, there might be a shutting down or a dissociative parts come up. So you know that maybe the client really wants to work on the exile and has parts that want to heal, but then there's other parts that have some concerns. So there's polarization inside. Now, the goals of addressing polarization to enhance flexibility, so that's in behavior in the responses of the parts or to reduce the stuckness inside. And then perspective taking, so enhancing the perspective taking regarding both sides of the polarization to heal the exile that is protected by the polarized parts and enhance self-leadership and decision making. The first step is to map the polarization. So you can do it verbally, where you can ask the client to check in and share, okay, so tell me more about the parts on this side and the parts on that side, and then you're mapping them out verbally or asking the client to hold each side in each hand. You can also externalize through writing, so writing down the names of the parts on one side and the other side, or drawing them using figurines. It's often really helpful to just draw a table, a conference table, any shape, and then have the client invite the parts to sit at the table. So it could be that the opposing parts, polarized parts, are sitting on opposite sides, and the conference table is also helpful if when you ask the how do you feel towards both sides question and you get more reacting parts, because then you can have them also sit at the conference table to unblend and help the client access their self. And another technique is for in-person sessions. You can set up chairs and ask the client to sit in different chairs and embody different parts. And then the second step is unblending from parts. So that is we want the client to have an equal open heart toward both sides. And to have that, we want to ask the how do you feel towards question towards both sides. And oftentimes you may have to do it a few times because as you ask the how do you feel towards question, you see that there could be parts that are aligned with this side or aligned with that side. And so we want to unblend from those and really reassure everyone that the client's not going to be choosing sides, and the goal is to listen to both sides. And then you can start with the side that has the most energy in the moment. Okay, so the next goal is for client self to listen to both sides and explore their wants, how are they trying to help, what's their goal for the client, and what are their fears. So like if they stopped reacting like that, stopped doing what they're doing, like what would happen? Through that, you identify the exile that they protect. I want to say that oftentimes as you get to know the part's goals, you do end up identifying that the overarching goal that they have is to protect the client. So they have that common goal. They may often have a common exile that they protect. So you can share the possibility of healing the exile and burdening the parts. Now that there's more self energy because the client's getting to know those parts using, from their self. So you can invite communication between both sides and offer hope for a different dynamic where both sides are in harmony. So you can check to see if they want a dialogue. You can use the hands technique. So, this part says this. How is it this for this part to hear that? What does this part say to that? And then so on. And our goal for this is to see if both sides are understanding each other's perspective and understanding each other's positive intention with client self present. So the short-term goal for polarizations, like addressing polarization. So, it's to have the parts negotiate or find a way to work together with the client self present. But the long-term goal is to heal the exile so that they're not burdened, so it's easier for those parts to work together long term. And I want to say the overarching goal of addressing polarizations is to restore self-leadership. But it's seeing it in a short-term, long-term way is helpful because addressing polarizations, it might be a one session thing, it might be a few sessions. So it's helpful to have a way to see it in a short-term, long-term way. And as you try addressing polarizations, you'll see that it can be a lot of fun as you map them out and use visualization. And it can be super helpful. I've noticed it can be super helpful for enhancing inner balance and restoring self-leadership in the form of decision making. So, the self deciding which side's behavior or strategy to use in which situation while honoring the other side just the same in other situations. Thank you.